Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. As always, I'm Labi, and I'm joined here by Jacob. Before we get into it, we just want to apologize for the week break. Technical difficulties sometimes come up, and unfortunately, that was the case last week. But we're back here with a brand new episode today, and we're excited to talk about, a whole lot of stuff going on with the 2 week break between episodes. Jacob, how are you doing?
I'm well. Stupid ass computer decided not to copy the file, so here we are again 2 weeks later. I'm excited.
Yeah, sometimes you just can't control when your computer's going to decide to stop working.
Yeah,
And
shit the bed.
yep, and it's not like we're working at like a fancy studio with fancy computers. I
Nope.
got my MacBook Air, and that's about it.
Hey, but it's better than what I got. So
Awesome. The good thing is, like we were talking about before we started recording, a lot of what we discussed in the Lost episode last week is still relevant to sort of talk about this week. In fact, you can even argue that there's been some, new storylines coming out from the topics that we were discussing. Last week, we talked about how Jeff Skinner on the Buffalo Sabres was a healthy scratch. And then since then, Jack Eichel with a lower body injury. I saw a funny tweet saying I didn't know that a broken back from carrying the Sabres was considered a lower back injury. And then I saw another tweet that said I didn't know get me the hell out of Buffalo syndrome was a lower body injury. But yeah, so Jack Eichel also missed, I believe, the Sabres last game as well.
yeah, he
And
did.
I think that opens up the conversation that we were having last week that unfortunately got lost, but it's still very relevant, which is, the whole situation with Eichel and, him potentially wanting out of Buffalo, Jeff Skinner getting paid $9 million dollars to be a healthy scratch, and Taylor Hall's really struggled in his first season here in Buffalo. So, yeah, just what's your whole take on that situation?
Well, the whole Buffalo situation is actually very interesting in my opinion because they look like a really good team on paper, right? Jeff Skinner, first season, first year with the Sabres, scores 40 goals, like 20 assists, which for a guy whose prime was in Carolina, that's not bad. Buffalo really looked on the upside, and then he signed that contract, and that was not on the upside. Um, and the whole Eichel thing, yeah, lower injuries are prone to happen. It's gonna happen. Like Matthews has missed the last 2 games, or I think it was just game because he had a wrist injury, but he's been dealing with that for since the beginning of the season. So I don't want to say that maybe the lower body isn't as serious as they think it is. I just think he needs a break. He is like what you said. He's carrying the team on his back, and there's not much else considering that, but
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I think it's a legitimate injury for all the people who are making, like, for all the people who thought that him being like, a late scratch, injured scratch was because he was getting traded. Like, no, a Jack Eichel trade isn't something that's just going to get broken, like, randomly during a warm up. Like, the Buffalo Sabre, like, that will literally determine the future of the Buffalo Sabres franchise. They're just not going to rush into trading Jack Eichel. But like you said, I think it speaks to the fact that on paper, maybe you think that they're going to be a good team, or, in theory, having those types of guys, they should be doing well. But ultimately, like you said, we've seen, Skinner not live up to his contract. We've seen Hall struggle this year. And you look at even some of their younger players, it seems like this is the third year in a row we've been talking about how Rasmus Dahlin is going to develop, and we just haven't seen it yet. Right, and
yeah.
is part of that to blame? Is part of that to blame that Buffalo's been playing poorly? Is part of that to blame that maybe Buffalo is just not the right place to develop? Maybe part of that's on Darlene is just not as talented as he was expected to be. You can debate that, but I definitely agree with you in the sense of Buffalo. It's just it seems like every year you can maybe make an argument for them being like a dark horse playoff team, and then it seems like every year nothing goes right.
Well, every year we say the same thing. Oh, they have a new team. Oh, they brought in Taylor Hall. Oh, blah 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 blah. It doesn't matter. It's Buffalo. There's no goaltending. There's no defense. Like you said, Dowling was not the He didn't develop the way everyone thought he would. Everyone thought he could, and Buffalo is like a place where you go to die. It just seems like that's what's gonna happen, and unfortunately, Eichel's gonna want out of there eventually. He will.
Yeah, no, I
Be-
mean, I agree with you. I mean, you look at the team. Rasmus Ristolainen, I mean, he's good, but I don't think he's reached the potential that people thought he would.
yeah, I agree
Uh,
with you.
Same with Rasmus Dahlin. And then, I didn't even realize that Brendan Montour was on the Buffalo Sabres. Like, this is a guy who, when he was, I believe he was with the Anaheim Ducks organization,
Yeah,
he
he's
was
with the
seen,
Ducks.
yeah, he was seen as like a pretty, solid young defenseman. And I mean, I can't say I've watched any Sabres games. The Penguins haven't played the Sabres yet. We're about to play them 8 times this year, which I'll just say as a Penguins fan, I'm really looking forward to at least 6 wins. Or it better be at least 6 wins. But that's a whole other topic that I wanted to get into later. But I mean, clearly, if the Sabres are struggling, Brendan Montour can't be playing, spectacularly well. Um, and then, like you said, it's going to be very interesting. Like Casey Middlestat's in the last year of his entry level contract. I mean, I don't think his numbers have really blown anybody away. I mean, he hasn't played poorly by any stretch of the imagination, but like he hasn't really played, like he hasn't been given a lot of time. Just looking at his numbers, obviously, just the 31 games last year, 9 points, and he has 3 points in 7 games this year. So it's a very very small sample size. It's really hard to make any sort of assessment of that. But once again, you look at the big boys and the money that they're signed for. Taylor Hall with 1 goal and 12 points in 19 games
Yeah,
this year.
that's unacceptable. That is
And
unacceptable.
then, like you said, Jeff Skinner with the 40 goals his first year in Buffalo. And since then, he's played 76 games with the Buffalo, 75 games. My math was wrong for a second there. With the Buffalo Sabres in the past 2 seasons. And in those 75 games, he has 14 goals and 24 points.
Yeah, that's all. That is also unacceptable for what you were getting paid. Um, and a lot of people kind of compare him to Nylander. Nylander's like the Jeff Skinner of the Leafs because he's getting paid a shit ton and not performing. Although he has been performing as of recent. Um, Listen, the whole problem with Skinner and I have with him is I have this a lot with teams who sign based on 1 year of performance. Is you only get it's like a free trial. Like you don't get the whole package. And if you like what you see the first year, here's what I would have done if I were the Sabres. I would have signed him to a bridge year, maybe 2 year bridge deal contract, and if he doesn't pan out, get rid of him. Maybe 5 million, which isn't too bad, but they signed him to a stupid ass deal worth $9 million. I don't even know how many years it is. I think it's like 6 or 7.
Yeah, so he has 6 more years left, which is, yeah, six
And
more
he's
years
not getting
left.
any better.
No.
Like like what do you think the chances are of him having another 40 goal season the way he's playing? He's being a healthy scratch when he should have been the first line every single game.
Yeah, I mean it's possible because he's done it before, but
She's
I mean it's very unlikely.
but
And
he's
like you
not
say,
getting any younger. That's the
yeah, no,
problem.
absolutely. That's why it's not very likely. And also, like you said, when you're playing him as a healthy scratch, you know, obviously he's can't score if he's up in the press box, right? And the Nylander point that you made is interesting as well because when you judge players, there's different ways that you can judge them on. And I think the reason why Nylander gets the criticism he does is not because of his production, but it's because of his production relative to what he's being paid, which is fair. Because William Nylander making $6.9
Yep.
million dollars a year, he's going to expect to produce like a $6.9 million a year guy. Because if you look at Nylander's numbers, I mean, last year he had 30 goals, 59 points in 68 games. That's a really good season. But because he's making $7 million a year, he's going to have criticism around, like that's expected of him. That's like the bare minimum. Where if you look at, so the criticism of Nylander is purely, is it value for money? It's not a production issue, it's a value issue. Where with Skinner, it's both, right? Like you're mad that Skinner's not scoring, and then you're equally like you're even more mad because he's not scoring and he's making $9 million a year, right?
Right.
And I think that's where you really pinpoint what the worst contracts are because sure there are players who are getting overpaid, but they're still playing well. right? Like you're never going to be mad at having a 60-point guy in your lineup. You're only going to be
Yeah.
mad if you're overpaying that 60-point guy, right?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing with Nylander is you can't really compare him to Skinner because he's definitely started to pick up recently. Skinner is sitting in the press box when at least Nylander is getting opportunities to play, and instead of benching him, which Keith did for a little bit for the last 8 minutes of one of the games, he benched Nylander because of his poor performance. Um, like my whole thing is that works up until a point where it doesn't. Putting Skinner in the press box for 3 games in a row, I don't think is going to help him his confidence like it's already shot already. That's not going to help him at all in the slightest. Like with Nylander, he was benched for 8 minutes and then he came back and he scored 2 goals in the next game and won the game for the Leafs. So
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, I mean, it's not only that he was also still a healthy scratch when Eichel was a late scratch, right? So
yeah,
like and at this point, do you blame how much of the blame is on the coach, Ralph Kruger? How much of the blame is on the management? How much of the blame is on ownership? How much of the blame is on the player? But I mean, I think we're both on the same page where it's like if he's a healthy scratch, okay, fair enough. Maybe you're making a point, you're proving a point.
yeah.
Um, but if Eichel is a late injury scratch and you need to bring another guy into the lineup to replace that late scratch, and you're not bringing Jeff Skinner, the Buffalo Sabres had, I think it was $27 million in cap space in healthy scratches in that game, because Eichel was a healthy scratch making 10, Skinner was a healthy scratch making 9. There's 19 million, and then I believe there was another player who's injured who was out of the lineup for whatever reason who was making like some kind of money. I'm gonna get like the value wrong, but they had at least $19 million in scratched players
which is
salary.
which is ridiculous. Like that as a professional hockey team, having you cannot spare any cap. Like and putting $19 million to sit on the bench or to sit in the box, it's unacceptable. And when does it come down, like you said, to the coach? But when does it come down to the player? Has to get his own confidence back, and the coach isn't going to do that. That's not working. Sitting him isn't going to work because they're still not winning. So at what point does Skinner finally get off this snide and finally realize that he's got to change something to his game? And there's no excuse of saying, "Oh, we're in a tough division." Yeah, sure. So what? So is Minnesota and LA, and they're both in playoff positions right now. So, which is terrifying to think of if you think about it. There's no excuse. Like at this point, getting paid 9 million for 6 years, you have no choice but to play well. Like I don't want to sound like a dick when I say that because I'm in no position. I just watch hockey. But as a fan, you expect guys who are getting paid these absurd amount of monies for these absurd amount of years. You expect them to start performing, and Skinner really needs to start performing, or else his time in Buffalo is limited.
No, absolutely. And then I think, we were talking about this obviously last week as well, but, what does a Jack Eichel trade look like?
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
here's because we were talking last week, I mentioned how, you look at the Skinner contract, and we kind of both agree that I don't think there's any way that Skinner could find a form that makes him play up to that contract. But that contract is literally impossible to get rid of.
Yeah.
And we've talked about, potentially trying to package Jeff Skinner in an Eichel trade or even in a Taylor Hall trade, because you imagine with him on a 1-year deal and Buffalo nowhere near the playoffs that they're probably going to try to sell Taylor Hall. And I mentioned last week, I think Taylor Hall, as much as he's really been a step down in production ever since he won MVP, because people forget that he won MVP.
Yeah, and he single handedly took the Devils to the playoffs, and they almost put up a really good fight against the Lightning.
Yeah, they did put up a good fight against Lightning. Obviously, like you said, couldn't get it done. But I mean, I think he's the best 1-year rental the NHL has ever had on the market since Marian Hossa, back when he had the whole went to the Penguins when the Red Wings won the cup, went to the Red
Yeah,
Wings when the Penguins won the cup,
and
then
then
went to the
finally won it
Blackhawks
in
and
Chicago.
finally won it in Chicago. But yeah, I think he's the best 1-year rental we've had. But what I was saying is, you know, because of how much money Hall and Eichel make to begin with, and because of the fact that, they're only going to want to get traded to like a contending team to some extent, there's really no team that's going to be able to bring on that much salary and then also package a $9 million Jeff Skinner contract with it.
Yeah, like Buffalo, if they want to get rid of Skinner, they're gonna have to retain at least 50%. They're gonna have to, because no one's gonna take 9 million for 6 years. There's no way.
No, they're definitely not. And I mean, beyond that, they can't afford to. I think last week I was saying how I really only see, in terms of teams with the cap space, who would be able to take on those contracts. And that's really only like the Los Angeles Kings or the New Jersey Devils or the Detroit Red Wings or the Ottawa Senators. He's not going to want to go to one of those teams unless Ottawa can find a way to convince him that all the young players they have are all going to develop. But I don't think he's going to buy that, because that's what Buffalo's been selling him for years. Or at this point, I don't think Eichel's going to want to take a risk on we're taking steps forward. He's going to want a sure thing. He's going to be like, no, I'm going to a team that I know right now are good,
Mm-hmm.
not a team that could be good 3 years from now,
Because
because that's what Buffalo keeps telling him.
he's just in the same spot. If he goes to the Senators, he's just on the Ottawa Senators now. It's the same. It's the same situation. Like, you're
No,
right. Like, he
absolutely,
does
yeah.
he does want to go to a team that is a contender. Like a team maybe like here's a crazy deal. The Rangers could pick him up, because the Rangers could be really good in the next few years.
Yeah, there are constant reports saying that he's going to end up with the New York Rangers. And so, once again, here's the thing with the Rangers. If you look at their cap situation, they have projected $25 million in cap space for next season, which sounds like a lot of money. But then let me read the list of players that they would need to re-sign with the $25 million. Pavel Buchnevich, Brett Houghton, Philip DiGiuseppe, Brendan Smith, Ryan Lindgren, Libor Hayek, and Igor Shesterkin.
Ooh,
Philip
that's a big
Keitel,
one.
who's on injured reserve, also would need to be a guy that they would need to re-sign. I mean, technically, Jack Johnson has an expiring contract, but let's be real, he's not getting re-signed, which is why I ignored him. But those are a lot of roster spots that you have only $25 million to eat up. And if
Yeah.
Jack Eichel's going to take $10 million away from that, well, then you need to sign. Well, then you're essentially getting rid of Shesterkin, and you're committing to Georgiev, and then you're going to have to just sign a veteran goalie at a minimum, right?
Yeah.
Because if you only have $15 million, like, I doubt they let Brendan Smith, Ryan Lindgren, and Libor Hayek all go. Those are all really solid. Like, Brendan Smith's a solid defenseman, but then Lindgren and Hayek are two really, one of their top prospects, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. Like, they're not going to let Shoshokin walk. He's going to be their future. Like, him and Gorgiev will probably be the best duo of goaltenders if they develop in the next 5 years. So they definitely can't let them walk. And then you got all those young prospects that the Rangers need to develop properly so that they can have an actual contending team. Uh, I can't see any veteran goalie. Maybe I don't know what veteran goalie would go to the Rangers. Whoever they can find, I guess. There's a few expiring. What, mate? You know what? Freddie Anderson goes to the Rangers.
I doubt they would do that. I said veteran more in the sense of, like, if you're not able to re-sign Shesterkin, then you're committing to Alexander Georgiev as your starter, and
Right.
then you would bring in, like, when I say veteran guy, I mean
Oh.
you would
Okay.
find a capable backup goalie who's willing to take like $1 to $2 million a year to just be a stable backup,
Okay.
right?
Gotcha.
But and then here's the other thing too. We do talk about all these players that need to get re-signed and everything like that. But if you're trading for Jack Eichel, who are you giving up, right?
Probably your entire franchise and more.
Because I'd imagine the starting point would be like, I'd imagine that if the Rangers are making the trade, Pavel Buchnevich would probably go the other way because he's on an expiring contract, but it's RFA, so the Buffalo would have the RFA rights to Buchnevich. So I'd imagine that would be a start. But like, the Rangers aren't going to want to give up Panarin.
Nope.
The fan base would lose it if they traded Chris Kreider.
Likewise with Lafreniere. Like, they're not going to get rid of
Oh,
him.
I'm not even mentioning Lafreniere or Kako because they're just like, in my mind, those two are untouchable.
I would assume so,
But
especially with
then
the expansion draft coming up.
But then if you're acquiring Jack Eichel, right? That's where you have to draw the line, you know, because if you look at it from the Rangers perspective, obviously all of these guys are sort of untouchable. But then if I was a Buffalo Sabres fan and someone said, oh, Kako for like Kako and Buchnevich for Eichel, I'd be like, are you kidding me? What else am I getting? That's not enough. Where like from a Rangers perspective, you don't want to give up those guys. From a Sabres perspective, because you're trading Eichel, you're like, no, that's like not even close to what I want in return. So it's so hard to like consider what a fair trade would be in this situation.
It's hard to say because I don't know. Buffalo is gonna want like the entire franchise of another franchise for Eichel because he's, and to give credit to Eichel is he is playing like an entire franchise right now. He is the face and the fall of the Buffalo Sabres, and he's the fall, as in like he's never going to win a cup there, and it sucks because he deserves one. Like as a Leaf fan, he deserves a cup and he's played really, really well, and he always plays really, really well. There was a game last year against the Montreal Canadiens. Buffalo just got scored on the empty net. Eichel goes crashing into the net, comes off, and then he smashes his stick in the post. I don't know if you remember that game,
Yep,
but
yep.
it showed the frustration. Like no matter what he did, no matter how many times he scored, he would never win, never. And it sucks because someone like him, on his caliber, is playing to what he was in that draft. Obviously, he was in the same draft as Connor McDavid, and no one is touching McDavid.
Yeah, everyone knew he was going to be the number two guy. But to your point, forget just saying he deserves to win a cup. Eichel has 351 points in 371 regular season games.
And he's been
He's
injured a few times.
he has not played a single playoff game yet. So forget deserves to win a Stanley Cup. Like
Yeah.
this guy, like he deserves to be in the playoffs. Forget like Stanley Cup. We haven't
Yeah.
seen Jack Eichel in the playoffs yet, which is like it takes away, especially we talk about the growth of the game. Him being American is like you know that the NHL and like NBC and like the American side of the game
Yeah.
are extremely disappointed in like essentially you can make an argument. Obviously, Eichel Matthews is a huge debate, so I'm not going to get into it. But a top two American player in the league is not participating in the playoffs year in and year out. That's a loss for the growth of hockey in America, particularly when you remember that the other top two American player is playing for a Canadian team.
Who is the other top two American player?
Matthews,
Oh, right. Well, yeah, that guy's kind of important, and he's kind
right?
of the reason why the Leafs are so good.
Right, but so my point is though, from an American perspective, you have Austin Matthews who's playing in Toronto, and then you have Jack Eichel who's not playing
Yeah.
because Buffalo.
He's
Like I know that's
yeah.
kind of harsh to say, but in terms of like the growth of the game, right? Where you look at when Wayne Gretzky moved to LA, that was huge for the growth of the game in like California and the southern United States because the best player in the world was playing in Los Angeles. So, from a marketing perspective for the NHL, it's also terrible that we haven't seen, a Jack Eichel player in the playoffs. And the next thing I want to say too is when we talk about what a trade looks like, we genuinely have no clue because I don't remember the last time, like a bona fide top 10 player, once again, which you can debate, but I'll just say like an elite, like to use the NHL like video game franchises, like a guy with like medium elite, medium franchise potential
Yeah.
has been traded. Where in the NBA, we kind of know what the price tag is because we've seen like the Anthony Davis trade, we've seen like the James Harden trade, we've seen the Kawhi Leonard trade, like we've seen
Yeah.
massive blockbusters in the
Yeah.
NBA. So you like even if you're not a huge fan of basketball, just by looking at the history, you kind of know what it's going to take. Okay, it's going to take a couple of prospects and a bunch of draft picks, or in the case of the Kawhi trade, it's going to take like one of your best players on the team and a prospect and a draft pick. Where in the NHL, like I can't remember the last time a massive top whatever player in the league has been traded.
Well,
So
there was one
there's
recently.
which would be
Patrick Laine and Pierre-Luc Dubois, last blockbuster trade.
but you see, I would not argue. I'd argue that that's kind of like the tier below the types of players of like an Eichel.
Oh, okay. No, okay. I just thought I thought it was a blockbuster trade because these are the first and third overall
Oh,
pick.
yeah, I know for sure. Like that's definitely a huge trade, but that was very much of like a I'm unhappy, get me out of here, and it
Yeah.
was like a
Okay.
1-for-1 swap. Like I don't see that. Like who's Eichel going to be a 1-for-1 swap? Like the only player I can see like a 1-for-1 swap happening with Eichel are players where the other team would never agree to it. Like the Avalanche aren't going to 1-for-1 swap McKinnon, the Leafs aren't going to 1-for-1 swap Matthews, right?
No, obviously not. You're right. I can't see a player because Eichel's too good. Eichel is like too good to be traded for a one-on-one, but not good enough to be traded for like too many prospects or stuff like that. It's weird because he's performing well, but he's not performing like outstandingly. And if he was playing like Matthews, like if Matthews and him switched roles, Eichel would be worth a significantly more amount of prospects, of picks, and of players. Um, and it's just he's got no one around him either. Like, look at the Leafs compared to Buffalo as teams, and right away you look at the Leafs and you're like, okay, they have four lines of absolute destruction. Well, Buffalo is like, yeah, you got Eichel. You got Eichel. Like,
No, for sure. And the other thing is like if you look at the history of trades, in the NHL you have to go back a pretty long distance to talk about big name trades, and even then like the way the NHL works is very different to how like the NBA works, where star players are rarely get traded, and if a star player leaves, it's like a John Tavares situation where the contract's expiring and they just don't re-sign. And so they either get traded as like a rental in the last year of their deal, or they just go into free agency. We saw Panarin, for example, right? Going into free agency and just signing with a new team. Where you rarely see trades. And then when you do see trades, I mean, I just looked up like NHL blockbuster trade history, and if you remember some of these, like they are extremely difficult to get right, and most of the time they end up working out like they hardly ever like work out well both ways. Like they're usually like terrible for one team or the other.
yeah.
Like the Tyler Sagan trade, for example.
Which one?
Tyler Sagan to
Oh man,
Dallas.
I don't want to talk about it.
No, to Dallas, not the Toronto one. Don't worry,
Oh,
don't worry.
okay, okay.
Which,
Yeah, for
which
yeah.
is equally a bad trade, but I'm talking about the one to Dallas, where
Okay.
Boston gave up Sagan for Louis Erickson, Joe Morrow, Riley Smith, and Matt Frazier. I wonder who won that trade.
Yeah, I wonder who won. Yikes.
Right? Or another one was the only one that I can think of that worked out both ways was the Wendell Clark Leafs trade. Speaking of the Toronto Maple Leafs, because they traded Wendell Clark, but they got Matt Sundin.
Yeah, and obviously Sundin became one of the best players in the history of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Right. So that's like the one trade that I can think about where it's like, okay, that's a blockbuster trade where it ended up working out both ways. But remember that trade also happened in 1994.
Yeah. So,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
and the last huge trade that I can think of that's relevant in the NHL is the Erik Karlsson trade,
The San Jose one. That's right.
which is like I think really is the last example of like a superstar player getting traded. And
And who's
if
winning
we
that one?
and here's the thing, if you examine the Erik Karlsson trade, you would argue that the Senators won the trade.
I would say the Senators won the trade. Eric Carlson had won half a year with the Sharks, and he's not playing right now. He's hurt.
But then the thing is why did the Senators win the trade? The Senators won the trade not for. I'd argue that the Senators won the trade not for what they received, but for more so for how Erik Karlsson just didn't work out, because Karlsson's now on an awful contract
Oh, yeah, it's bad.
and he has injuries that have really hurt his career. And it's, I don't think it's harsh. I think it's, if anything, I sympathize for Karlsson, but I think I've made my opinion on Erik Karlsson really clear. The guy has like I believe I can't know remember if it's his left or right, but his left or right like foot is essentially like more plastic and metal than it is skin because
Yeah.
he's had so many surgeries on that foot.
Yeah, I think it's his right.
Yeah. Um, where if you look at what the Sharks gave up, Chris Tierney,
Yep.
I don't think like the Senators are really got anything spectacular there. Sure, he's a solid third line center.
Yeah.
Rudolph Balcers next.
Next.
Dylan DeMello, depth defenseman, not
Yep.
really gonna do much. Josh Norris,
Still playing.
once again, literally same kind of depth defenseman, right?
Yep.
And then
The
the 2020 first round pick,
and who was that?
which they turned into Tim Stützle.
Yep.
And so that is where you have because of how Carlson has not worked out, the Senators win the trade with Stützle alone.
Yeah, legitimately, Stutzla is the only that's they could have just traded for that pick and the Senators still would have won, but instead they got a good defenseman who's still playing. DeMello was okay, Tierney was okay, but you gave the Senators Stutzla, and that was the biggest mistake. That pick is gonna haunt the Sharks in the next 5 years.
Right, but then when you look at when you look at the factors around that, and this is why I think that really the Sabres can't read anything into that if they're considering trading Eichel, because the Eichel contract, like Eichel's locked up long term $10 million a year, that contract's not going to turn out the same way that the Carlson contract turned out.
Right,
Like, he's already on a better contract than Carlson, and once again, you can't control injuries. Like, obviously, knockwood, you don't want that to happen. It's possible that the day after Eichel gets traded, he gets a career-ending injury. You can't really control for that, but you would assume that he doesn't have any injury history. Sure, he's been injured in his career, but there's nothing like significant about having long-term effects of injuries, and the way Carlson's injury like essentially has ruined his career because he's not the same mobile skater that he once was, that he dominated in, right? But I think if Carlson doesn't have that injury and he's a top 5 defenseman in the NHL, sure, the Senators have Stützle, but I think you would argue then that the Sharks win the trade, or it's much more even. And then the only reason that the Senators got Stützle is because that Sharks pick ended up being third overall, which
yep.
ultimately was the fact that the Sharks were a garbage hockey team last year, partially because of the injuries, partially including Erik Karlsson, right? Where
Yeah.
if you can't rely on draft picks in return if you're trading a star player, because if Eichel gets traded to a team that makes the playoffs, that's going to be the 20th overall pick, and you're not going to find a Tim Stützle or you could find a Tim
You
Stützle at 20,
might
but it's
like
it's
Henrik.
definitely not a lock in the same way having a top 3 pick in this past draft was.
Right.
Lafreniere, Byfield, Stützle, it's pretty much a lock no matter what. When you're picking 20th, it's definitely not a lock, right?
Right.
As you look at trades in the past and the draft picks that people got who were used on it, and not to bring up like the Leafs, but I mean, once again, if you really want to take the other side, you can argue that, well, the picks the Leafs gave up that turned into those players, who's to say that the Leafs would have picked that player at that spot anyways, right? For all you
Right.
know, the Leafs would have never drafted Sagan because they would have liked the look of some other guy around the draft, right?
Well, it's funny you say that because Brian Burke, give him credit when he was GM. The Leafs were supposed to have a higher pick, but they waited till Riley fell to eighth
Yeah,
because
Morgan Riley is like one of the greatest draft picks the Toronto Maple Leafs have done in the last 10 years.
I
Like
would even argue he's
Burke said he would have picked Riley at 1, and I mean he's proven that was the correct take based on that draft class. I'm looking at you, Nail Yakupov.
yeah. Okay, funny story. I think it was Spittin' Chicklets they were talking, and Burke said that was probably the worst interview he's ever had with a pick like a draft of all
Yeah,
time.
I've heard that interview as well. It's a great listen.
It's fantastic. We recommend you check it out. Um, but yeah, it's right. Yakupov didn't play like that. Riley developed properly. Yakupov went, and here's the thing with going like eighth or ninth in a draft is everyone is really focused on the top like five. How many teams passed up on Riley? Like seven other teams passed up on him when they could have taken him instead. But because everyone was so focused on um, everyone was so focused on Yakupov and whoever else was in that, or whoever else was in that draft. I don't remember who was in that draft, but it really goes to show that maybe it was good that Riley wasn't so high. You know, maybe it was good, and I think a lot of players now need to realize that maybe going first, second, and third overall is not the best for them because they have like Lafreniere. He's not playing the greatest hockey. He's not playing as expected, and he's chastised for it. So I think going a little later in the draft actually helps some people in the sense of there's not as much pressure, and if they're doing poorly, it's not as highlighted.
No, for sure. And I think the other thing is, when you talk about trades in the NHL and stuff like that, you know, this isn't a video game in the sense of if a player has a listed potential in a video game, that's what their potential is, full stop,
Right.
right? Like if you're playing like the NHL video game and you draft a player and he's got medium top six potential, you know that there's like a 90% chance that you can develop him up to that potential. Or if you're scouting a prospect in the video game and it tells you that this is his overall, then that's his overall.
Right.
Where in real life, obviously it's not like that at all. And so when you have a player like Eichel, who is a top, and once again, I'm not getting into the debate about where you'd slot in Eichel. So, he's a top, whatever you want to say, whether you argue top 10, top 20, top whatever. He's a bona fide star player in the league.
Right.
you know, is a draft pick or a prospect enough? If I'm the Buffalo Sabres, I kind of want a proven player or a player who has, a prospect that is like a guaranteed type of prospect, which of course no prospect's like a guaranteed, but you know what I mean in terms of
Yeah.
like as close to a sure thing type of prospect as you can get.
Well, like
And
look at Matthews. He was basically guaranteed.
Well, exactly, and that's the thing of like these guys who go in the top are typically guaranteed. Although you talk about drafts, I think like one of the most recent drafts that I always like to go back to is the 2015 draft, which is the Eichel draft. McDavid and Eichel, you can't go wrong there. The Leafs were really criticized for taking Mitch Marner in that draft ahead of Noah Hannafin. I think that's
Yep.
worked out pretty well.
I think that's worked out pretty well for both teams.
I think the Arizona Coyotes regret taking Dylan Strome ahead of Mitch Marner, for example.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and if you look at defensemen, I mean, look, take nothing away from Noah Hannafin. I'm actually a huge Noah Hannafin fan. I think he's a fantastic defenseman. But if you look at the next two defensemen taken after him, Ivan Provorov and Zach Werenski, it's very hard for me to defend Noah Hannafin over either of those guys.
Right.
And then, I talk about how the Leafs have maybe given too many good prospects to the Boston Bruins via the draft. This is sort of a revenge for you. Boston picked 13th, 14th, and 15th. They picked Jakub Zaboral, Jake DeBrusk, good pick DeBrusk, and then Zachary Senyshyn. And then the 16th overall pick, directly after Boston had 3 picks in a row, is Matt Barzal, and then Kyle Connor, and then Thomas Chabot, and then Evgeny Svechnikov.
Wow.
So the Bruins had 3 draft picks in a row. They could have had 3 of DeBrusk, Barzal, Connor, Chabot, Svechnikov. Besser went a little bit after that, so did Konechny. Imagine if the Bruins had 3 of those players instead of 1. Which goes to the whole point of, the draft is never a sure thing. And, just because you trade a player for a first round pick, that first round pick can be the next best thing. Like you can have a 16th overall pick and get a Barzell, or an 18th overall pick and get a Chabot, but you can also have a third overall pick and pick Dylan Strome, or a first overall pick and pick Jack Hughes. Although once
Yeah.
again, I'm not ready to call Hughes a bust just yet, and I'm kind of
No.
jumping on the bandwagon there, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. He seems to be having a good season so far. Here's the problem. When you said people were taking over guys like Marner, I think when Shanahan first came into the Toronto, organization as the president, he told Lamorello, he said, "You're gonna pick these guys because I have a very good feeling about them." I think he knew what he wanted, and he was. Here's the thing with Shanahan that I love so much is that he was looking to the future, not now. He knew He knew we were going to suck. He said it. He said we are going to be hurting for a couple of years, and then he comes in, does his thing, and I don't think Marner is the player he is now if he's on a different team. I don't. And I think especially with the tank that the Leafs did to get Matthews, um, he knew that these guys would click. He knew 100%. Like Nylander was picked before both of these guys, I believe, and that's when it started.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Like, especially if it's not just Buffalo; it's literally every team in terms of who are they picking and what the expectations are. But just using Buffalo as like an example, with
Yeah.
like a Jack Eichel trade, like for example, like you said, um, when you draft a guy like Eichel or you draft a guy like McDavid, or this year, Lafreniere's getting criticism because when you draft a player first overall, the expectation is that in your rookie season you play in the NHL and you deliver.
Yeah, you play like Matthews. Every like first round is going to play like Matthews the second he comes in the season.
Exactly. And I think that a lot of people in LA are maybe being a little bit critical of why did we pick Byfield number 2 because
Yeah.
he's not even playing in the NHL. But like that's all but like you said that's not the point. The point is the long-term future. Who
Yeah.
cares if Byfield plays in the NHL year 1 or year 2? What you want is Byfield over the course of his entire career with Los Angeles to be better than another player over the course of his entire career. People
100%.
are ready to call Stutzel the best draft pick out of this draft class 20 games into the first season of the draft class, right? Like you said, it's all about development and it's all about when the right time to bring these players in is. But then in the context of that with Buffalo, you have to be you like is Buffalo in a win now mode? I don't think they are. But then if you're like part of the Buffalo Sabres organization, are you willing to say, okay, we're trading Eichel and then we're going to commit to a 3-year rebuild? I mean, Buffalo's been in a perpetual 15-year rebuild, like can you convince your fans that you're going to suck for the next 3 years? I don't think so. In
I,
the same case of, the you look at the Penguins and the Leafs trade over Kapanen, right?
yeah.
A lot of Penguins fans were critical that we gave up too much prospects, but then at the same time, a lot of Leafs fans were critical that they didn't get anybody that could help them because they're in a win now mode,
Yeah.
and which
Yeah.
comes down to what your team is doing. Like for example, with me with the Penguins with the whole Phil Kessel trade, I initially was a little apprehensive because I didn't think the players that we were getting were ready to help us win now. Fast forward 2 years, we've due to injury we've had to rush Pierre-Olivier Joseph into the lineup. Turns out he's ready for the NHL right now. He's been our like best defenseman this year. I wasn't expecting that though, so now I'm phrasing I rephrased the Phil Kessel trade in my mind. Now that Phil Kessel trade is a massive success because Pierre-Olivier Joseph, a player who I thought would be a player for the future, is ready now, and we're in win now mode, and he's helping with that, which is
Yep.
why I'm now looking at that as a more successful trade.
I got a question for you. Um, how long do you think it takes to say if a draft pick is a bust or a make? Like, how long would you give it before we can start calling people busts or success or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a phenomenal question, and I think that the answer really is it depends on where you're being picked,
Right.
which I think is fair.
So when would you call Jack Hughes a bust or not?
That's
Would
what
you
I'm
call him a bust or not?
and I think that I knew that's where you were going with it, and I think it's a very fair question. My answer, like when I say I'm not ready to call Jack Hughes a bust just yet, I say that because like I am almost ready. Like it's only his second season, and
Right.
so what I will say is I would wait until at the very minimum a player's entry level contract is up, which is 3 years, before you can officially state that a player is a bust, which is why
I,
I'm not ready to call Jack Hughes a bust yet. Obviously, he had 21 points in 61 games last year. He's got 12 in 17 games this year. If he can continue that level of production this year and then continue to grow upon that next year, then obviously he's not a bust. And so
what
I
a,
think you do have to wait. But like you said, it's certainly, well within reason of an NHL team, particularly if you're picking a guy first overall, second overall, third overall, to expect results right away and to be really harsh to judge. Like, I don't think it's too critical of Rangers fans to be disappointed towards Lafreniere. Equally, I don't think it's too critical of Rangers fans to be critical of Capo Caco.
right.
I'm not ready to call, definitely not Lafreniere. The guy's played 12 NHL games. But, Capo Caco 23 points last year, 3 points this year. I'm at this point starting to put him on like a warning list of when are you like is he going to be a bust? Is he not going to be a bust? Because this kind of stats are starting to look like the type of stats we saw from like a Nail Yakupov type of player, for example.
Right.
Right? But then to you sort of use the other hand, another Edmonton Oilers draft pick who was looked upon as a bust, who I wouldn't call a bust, is Jordan Eberle.
I think you know what? I think he needed a change of scenery, and I think he's doing pretty well in the island.
Exactly, and that's what it comes down to. I mean, Jordan Eberle, here's the other crazy thing too, which comes down to the expectation. Obviously when Jordan Eberle is drafted first round, and here's the thing, Jordan Eberle was drafted 22nd overall, wasn't even a top 10 pick.
Wow,
And
really?
if you look at his numbers with the Oilers, 43 points in 69 games, 76 points in 78 games, 37 points in 48 games, 65 points and 63 points in full seasons, and then 47 points in 69, 51 and 82 his last 2 years. So he slowed down a little bit, but Eberle was a consistent, pretty much 50-something point guy year in and year out. I don't understand why the Oilers ever thought of him as a bust.
Because he didn't perform the way they wanted to in the time he was there. And yeah, a lot of players aren't performing like they were when they were on Edmonton because Edmonton is garbage. Obviously, McDavid kind of saved that franchise. Um, but it kind of goes to show you're right. Like I feel like it's also Canadian teams have a lot more pressure to perform than American teams do. Like how many times would you have known that did you know that Tyler Seguin basically did nothing in last year's playoffs? You wouldn't have known that cuz Dallas made it to the finals. But look at Matthews and he has like one or two bad games in that one or two bad games in that series against Columbus and he's chastised because, he plays on the Toronto Maple Leafs. I feel like that's what
Absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
feel
I
like
think it's
that's
a
what
bit unfair to label all American teams, but I certainly agree that market matters a lot. Like if you play in New York, Chicago, Boston, Pittsburgh, like I think you're going to be in Philadelphia, you're going to
yeah.
be equally like put under the radar, but absolutely right. If you're playing in like a Florida or Columbus
You can get
or a
away with it. You can get away
Dallas,
with it.
absolutely, there's a lot less pressure to succeed. And I think that, I think my theory with the Toronto Maple Leafs. I think that the city of Toronto and the Toronto media puts way too much pressure on the Toronto Maple Leafs as a team to succeed, and I think that that's been detrimental to their ability to have success. Where you look at Phil Kessel, I mean, Phil Kessel was crucified as the member of a Toronto Maple Leaf. He was seen as the like embodiment. He was seen as the symbol of like this team's failure. He goes to Pittsburgh and he's like the fourth or fifth guy paid attention to because he's behind Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Fleury and all these guys. So essentially, he's just like, hey, you're here to play hockey. You don't need to talk to the media every day if you don't want to. They're not coming to search you out the way that they came to search you out in Toronto. They're not writing articles about you talking about how you're a lazy player. And what does he do? Guy wins 2 Stanley Cups. I
Yeah,
know
now
it's not as
now he's in Arizona not performing and no one's talking about it because no one cares.
right, and it's definitely not as easy. Like I'm not saying like, oh, the only reason why he won a Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh and not Toronto is because of the media. Like obviously when you play with Malkin and Crosby, like there are a lot of reasons why the Penguins won back-to-back Stanley Cups. But my point is like Phil Kessel's performances were a lot better in Pittsburgh, and I
Yeah.
think that does have something to do. Like obviously playing with Malkin has a lot to do with it too. But I think that you could tell that he was a happier person when he had left the Toronto media. So
Yeah,
I
because he's not getting
absolutely agree.
scrutinized every single game. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
and I mean, like Marner's had to deal with it, Nylander's had to deal with it. To some extent, now Tavares has had to deal with it. Like people are calling Tavares like a wrong decision for the Toronto Maple Leafs to make, and it's
Freddie's
like,
also dealing with it.
and I think that's just what they do. They jump from player to player because that's
Yeah.
what Toronto does. And it's not just Toronto. It's like TSN and Sportsnet are supposed to provide Canada-wide coverage. What
Yeah.
does what does that mean? It means we'll spend the first 15 minutes talking about the Leafs. We'll spend the next 10 minutes talking about the Oilers because that's where McDavid plays.
Yep.
Then we'll talk about the Habs and the Flames and the Jets. No, not even the Jets. The Habs and the Flames for a little bit. And then if
Yep.
we have time, we'll vaguely mention the Jets and vaguely mention Ottawa.
Yeah, it's the TSN, the Toronto Sports Network, and as a fan, I cannot stand it. I know what my team is going through. I don't want 50 minutes on it. Like, for fuck's sake. Oh shit, are we allowed to swear on this? I don't
Yeah,
care.
yeah, we're all good.
Like,
And like you said, it's the same thing in the U.S. as well. Like if you look at Winter Classics, for example, or like outdoor games, or like look at the teams that play on NBC, like the Penguins and the Penguins and the Blackhawks, I swear played an outdoor game every other year.
yeah, the Blackhawks, the Bruins, and the Flyers. They play a bunch too.
The Penguins, the Flyers, the Bruins, the Blackhawks, and the
Like what?
Rangers
Like when we got
are the only teams that America cares about, frankly.
Like when we got that outdoor classic between Nashville and Dallas, I was like, hell yeah, this is different. This is good. It was fun. It was a fun game. Corey Perry had that meme where he had to walk down the had to walk of shame because he was an idiot and went in like 2 minutes into the game. But it's fun. I like when we can watch other games because it really does. It prov- it provides like other cities to like. When's the last time you heard about Nashville and the last time you heard about Dallas? Like you don't care. If you're seeing Pittsburgh every year, you know who's playing. Crosby, Malkin, Marchand, Pasternak. I want to see change. I want to see something cool. I want to see Dallas play because Dallas doesn't play outside.
Absolutely. And that's why when you take a look at lists of the most underrated players or the most overrated players, typically the first thing you do is look at what market they play for. Why is Jonathan Huberdeau and Alexander Barkov, why were they looked at as the most underrated players? Because they played in Florida. No one really paid attention to them until they were in the second round of the playoffs, and everyone was like, when they were finally get put on national TV because there's only like 8 teams left in the playoffs. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, maybe these
Oh.
guys are like really good at hockey. Why have we literally not watched a single one of their games all year?
Oh yeah, because it's Florida. No one gives a shit about Florida.
Exactly. And then why are the most overrated players playing for big market teams? And actually, that's what I wanted to pivot into, actually. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Is
First,
Carey Price still an elite goaltender?
before I answer that, did you know Florida is tied for first in the division, but you never would have known that?
Yep, exactly. Florida just gets Florida's the most underrated team. Like Florida's a legitimate Stanley Cup contender if Sergei Bobrovsky can learn how to stop a puck, which is a
Yeah.
whole nother conversation. But no one's talking about them as a Stanley Cup contender. I think
Oh,
they are.
so
If they
so
if they can knock out Tampa Bay in their interdivisional playoffs,
that would be
watch out.
crazy.
Watch
That
out.
you know what? I still don't think they get the credit they deserve because it's Florida. Um, is Carey Price still an elite goaltender? I got to think about this. Tell me your thoughts on it.
Well, because here's the thing. I think that people look at Carey Price and they're just like, oh, well, he's Carey Price. Of course he's good. And the thing with goalies is it's really, really hard to evaluate goalies because so much of it is dependent on the team that they're in front of. And then also like save percentage and goals against average as statistics don't always tell like the full picture. Like, for example, like evaluating Andrei Vasilevsky is really hard to do because on one hand, he's a phenomenal goalie. On the other hand, if you put like Mackenzie Blackwood on the Tampa Bay Lightning, can he match Vasilevsky's numbers? Right?
Well,
You can argue you can argue
Vasilevsky's
that
the
he
best
would,
goaltender in the league.
right? And so I think with goaltenders, it's like the most hard thing to do. Where like Eichel, we can look at a good player on a bad team and still recognize that Eichel's a damn good player. But like Mackenzie Blackwood, I think is the perfect example of like he's a damn good goalie, but because he plays on a useless team and his stats don't look good as a result, it's kind of hard to properly get an evaluation of how good he is. If you look at Carey Price's numbers, like whether that's normal statistics, whether that's advanced analytics, whether that's just the eye test of like the mistakes that he's made, say in the game against Ottawa a couple of nights ago, like
Yeah.
he doesn't look great. Also, like we mentioned earlier, you evaluate a player also on the contract he's on. I'm sorry, but that contract's starting to look bad. And I think it's been looking like overpaid for a while. So you start to maybe get to the conclusion of I don't know if Carey Price is an elite goalie. I'm not saying he's a bad goalie. I'm just saying I don't know if he's in the elite tier of goalies anymore. I think that there are enough goalies in the NHL that I would take over him now, where I don't know if I'm considering him elite.
I don't know if I'd call him elite either. He's still good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's elite. I agree with you. I don't think he's elite. He had his years, and he's getting older, and like you said, that contract is looking not so good anymore. Jake Allen's playing better than him, and I feel like that situation is kind of a lot like what's going on in Toronto right now. Jack Campbell is the only goalie in the Leafs right now who has a shutout. Um, and
Yeah, we've
Freddie
seen
should
Mackenzie Drieger outplay Bobrovsky in Florida.
100%.
Or is it Mackenzie Drieger or is it Chris Drieger? I'm gonna get that wrong. His last name is
Drieger.
Drieger. I know that for a fact.
It's Chris Drieger.
It's Mackenzie Weegar. It's Chris Drieger. There you go.
Wow, way to go, buddy. You know what? I'll give you an A for effort there on that one.
So what goalies would you pick over Price right now?
Vasilevsky. Um, that's a good question. Let me just pull up all the teams, and I'll go. We'll go. You know what? We'll do.
I'd go Connor Hellebuck over him.
Let's go. You know, let's go through all the goalies, and we'll say yay or nay.
Okay.
Okay. So Lightning, you have Vasilevsky.
I'm taking Vasilevsky.
Panthers, you have Bobrovsky.
I'm taking Price.
Okay. Blackhawks, you have Lankinen.
I'm taking Price, but here's a perfect example. I might off of his whole career body of work, I'm probably taking Price. Off of this year's form, I'm taking Lankinen.
Lankinen looks fantastic.
So so then this is what it means. What is the criteria? So what is the criteria? Is this a criteria of I'm the expansion draft general manager of the Seattle Kraken and I'm picking my franchise goalie, or am I a coach in a one-off game that's taking place tonight? Because if I'm drafting for the future of my franchise, well, I'm not taking Price because of his contract, but let's take the contract out of it, and we're just evaluating their ability.
Right.
If I'm picking a player for my franchise, I'm picking Carey Price. If I'm picking a starting goalie for tonight's game to get me a win, I'm picking Lankinen.
100%. He's really shown absolute stellar. Like, they're ahead of teams that should be in there. They're third in their division. Hurricanes, you have Reimer right now.
You see, here's the thing. Like, honestly, right now, the Carolina Hurricanes have good goaltending.
Yeah, Reimer's playing pretty well.
I mean, I'm taking Price, but then I think this speaks to our point. Like, when we're having a hard time justifying picking Carey Price over James Reimer and Kevin Lankinen, it's clear that he's really lost a step in his game.
Yeah. Well, he's older, too. I think that's why. That has a lot to do with it.
Well, and we were talking about how, what would the Montreal Canadiens do this season, and they've had stretches where they've looked like they could compete with the Leafs, and then they've had stretches like the games against Ottawa where they've looked like they're not a playoff team.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move along. You have Korpisalo.
I don't think he's been particularly good this year.
No, he's not been great. They're on a 5-game losing skid.
I mean, Columbus looked like a team that, yeah, they lost all that talent, but they were still going to be fine because of the system that they played. But I mean, genuinely, we talk about this. We talked about this in the footage we lost in terms of teams that we've been most disappointed by, and we both talked about how we've been extremely disappointed with Columbus.
Yeah. So Korpisalo or Price?
Price.
Okay. Pecorine or Price?
I think they're the same. They're goalies who used to be elite who just aren't elite anymore.
So who'd you pick, though?
Probably Price.
Probably Price. I'd probably agree with you. Then you got Thomas Greiss or Jonathan Bernier. Which one?
Oh, just skip the Detroit Red Wings.
Yep. And then Anton Khudobin.
I'll take Khudobin.
Wow, okay,
fair
fair
form.
Enough.
Based on form.
Dallas, just a heads up, they are last in their division, but they have played 8 games less than Detroit.
They've only played 10 games this season.
So, yeah, they played 16 games.
Khudobin's the reason they made the finals.
Correct. Okay, let's move on to the East. We have Samsonov.
Yeah, I gotta take Price.
Tuukka
Rask.
No question.
Yeah.
Semyon Varlamov.
I'm taking Varlamov. He's been really impressive this year.
He has been. I think he's been really impressive for them for the past few years.
Yeah, I think he's one of those like more underrated goalies where
I agree.
he's gonna he's gonna make the saves you expect him to make. He might not steal you as many games as like some other goalies, but he's certainly not gonna cost you games.
Now this is an interesting one. Kata hot.
Kinda hot.
Kata hot.
Oh,
Because
you
he's been
see,
compared to the next Carey Price.
I, okay, I'm judging this, and I guess I might as well mention this now because I'm sure we'll talk about Bennington at some point when we get
Yeah,
to the St. Louis
he'll show
division.
up for sure.
But the reason I'm mentioning this is because I'm thinking about like if I'm picking Team Canada, who do I have in net? Because I don't think Price is like an elite goalie necessarily, but as of right now, honestly, as of right now, I might argue that Mackenzie Blackwood should be the starting goalie for Team Canada, which might sound crazy, but Jordan Bennington has been up and down. Carey Price has been up and down. Kata Hot has been up and down.
So Hart or Price?
I'll go Carter Hart.
Wow. Okay. Um, Jari or Price?
Oh, that's so tough because Jari's been absolutely unbelievable the last 2 weeks, but then the first 2 weeks of the season, the guy couldn't stop a beach ball.
Yeah, it's inconsistent.
Because he's inconsistent, I think that's my biggest criticism of Price. So I'm gonna go Price because they've both shown they're inconsistent, but obviously Price's top level game is better.
Gorgiev,
Price,
Blackwood.
Blackwood,
Yep, I'm with you on that. And Olmark or Hutton, either one.
skip Buffalo. They're like Detroit.
All right, here's the next one, and this is an interesting one. You got Fleury.
I'm taking Marc-Andre Fleury has been the best goalie this season. If I had to hand out a Vezina trophy right now, it would go between him and Vasilevsky, and I'd probably lean Fleury.
Fleury. Holy shit, the Minnesota Wild are second in their division. I lied.
I mean,
They
Dollar Dollar Bill Kirill the Thrill.
Yeah, so their goalie is who is their goalie? Cam Talbot.
Is it really?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, that's disgusting. I'm taking Carey Price.
Yeah, no, I don't like Cam Talbot. Bennington.
Oh, like, am I too harsh for judging his like mental breakdown that he had the other day?
That was
But
fun,
like,
bro. He was challenging a 6'7" Dubnik.
I don't want my goalie punching like random people in the face after he gave up 4 goals on 15 shots. I'm taking Price. It's close.
Yeah, Price is a little more composed.
Yeah.
Then you have Grubauer.
Grubauer.
Then you have Jonathan Quick.
I think once again they're very similar players as well in terms of
Yeah.
like but I'll take Price.
I think this one's gonna be a little easier. This is Darcy Kemper.
Oh, I'm taking Kemper.
Yeah, I knew that one.
Kemp-
This one should be easy too. John Gibson.
I'm taking Gibson.
And Martin Jones.
No, I mean Carey Price, Martin Jones is garbage. But I
Yeah.
mean, I think that this is why I'm very interested in watching the Olympics because I really hope that Mackenzie Blackwood and John Gibson get opportunities being the starting goalie for their Olympic teams, and seeing what they can do with a competent team in front of them. And whether it's
Right.
Olympic, and once again, I'm pretty sure the World Championships are going on. I doubt the New Jersey Devils make the playoffs. I doubt the Anaheim Ducks make the playoffs. So not just Olympics. Like, I think that, this upcoming World Championships, Mackenzie Blackwood's definitely going to be Team Canada's goalie. At least I
Yep.
hope so. I mean,
I hope
unless
so.
Montreal misses the playoffs and they give it to Carey Price, but I hope they let Blackwood run the crease for the World Championships and give him a chance to prove that when he plays for Canada, he can be elite. And I think that will be his like dress rehearsal for a potential Olympic team.
Yep.
Because, like you said, it's really hard to evaluate like Price versus Blackwood, Price versus Gibson. I think Gibson's obviously shown enough in Anaheim where we can pick Gibson over him. But the same thing with like Gibson with an American, like the American national team in front of him. That's a very deadly proposition. It's going to
Yeah.
be hard to get by that team, and then beyond that, Like Gibson used to having to save the Ducks in games. He's not going to have to do nearly as much like with the United States.
I totally agree with you. And now finally, our division, the North Division, we have Frederick Anderson.
Yeah, I'm taking Freddie.
Okay, I'll give you that. We have Mike Smith.
No, Carey Price.
We have Connor Hellebuck. Not hard.
Hellebuck's literally like a top 3 goalie in the NHL.
Isn't it weird that you didn't take Mike Smith, although he's 6-1 in his last 7?
And you see, that's what I mean. I think you talk about big markets, it comes down to perception. Like, to be honest with you, I'm judging Mike Smith. I have no clue what he's done this year. I'm judging him based on what I know from his career, which is pretty much what he did back in Arizona, which is extremely like stupid of me to do, but that's all I know, right?
That's totally fine. Like, yeah, since coming back from injury, he's 6-1-0 with 2 shutouts and like a 145 goals against average.
And I did not know that.
Well, now you
Right?
do.
And like I follow hockey. I watch a lot of hockey. I don't just watch the Penguins. Like I watch every Penguins game, but like I'll watch a little bit of other stuff here and there. Like I'm kind of aware of who's playing well, who's not playing well. But like you said, it's so easy for players, especially in small markets or in non-traditional markets, to fly under the radar.
Like, you know about McDavid and Draisaitl, but you don't know what Mike Smith is doing.
Well, yeah, especially because the Oilers have that reputation of they win all their games like 8-7.
Yeah.
Right? And maybe that's true. Maybe Mike Smith's 6 wins are because he only gave up 7 goals instead of 9, right?
Yeah, well, obviously not, but
Well, yeah, of course.
let's move on. You said Connor Hellebuck, no question.
Yeah.
Jacob Markstrom, who's had a very disappointing start, I think.
He's had a very I mean, all of Calgary. I mean, we talked about last week. I mean, to make a long story short, I mean, Calgary and Columbus, and then I can't remember the other team I picked, but those were like my top 2 teams for teams I've been most disappointed by this year. And that includes Markstrom. I really thought that he would have a close to Vezina campaign. He really hasn't. With that being said, though, I'd still take him over Carey Price.
Um, and then we have Braden Holtby.
Yeah, this one's really tough too. This one's really tough too because, like, I'm very familiar with Braden Holtby's game, being a Pittsburgh Penguins fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just think that I think it's over. You know, like, granted, these are phenomenal goalies, but after a while, they just don't intimidate you the same way because they're older. Like, for example, Henrik Lundqvist, which, first of all, big shout out to the fact that he was back on the ice like
Yeah,
2 weeks after open
you
heart
know what?
surgery.
I can see him playing again this season.
Which is ridiculous because I thought that was just like his career done.
Yep.
But my point is, like, not to badmouth the guy because, like, absolute warrior, like one of the nicest people. Like, he's a perfect ambassador for the game. But I'm not scared of Henrik Lundqvist in the crease the way I would have been in 2014.
Right.
Right? And I don't
Right.
think that's being harsh at all. Braden Holtby in the crease in 2016. Like, Braden Holtby was Canada's #1 goalie back. Like, he should have been. Like, I honestly thought, like, Holtby had a case for being above Carey Price. Like, 2016 to 2018, like, those years where Washington couldn't get over the hump in Pittsburgh, and then when they did, they won the cup. Like, I thought that Holtby was one of the top goalies in the world. I don't think he's that anymore.
No, probably not top in the world. I agree with you. And I really thought he was going to do well. I really thought he was going to do well, and he didn't. He really didn't, and it's kind of sad to. It kind of sucks, because I wanted to see him do well. And then finally, Matt Murray.
Oh, I mean, I don't think I officially answered. I think I'd still
Oh,
take
yeah,
Price
sorry.
over. I think I'd still take Price over Holtby because as much as I said, like, during his prime, Holtby was pushing Price. Even in his prime, Holtby was never considered above Price, and so for that
Right.
reason, I still have to lean Price. And then obviously Matt Murray. Matt Murray's the GOAT, #1 goal in the NHL.
Right.
Obviously sarcasm. I'm taking Hogberg over.
Hogberg. Nice try. Hogberg had the backup.
Honestly, he hasn't played badly. He's been pretty solid.
Do you know what I've kind of found as a common theme this season is the backups are playing better than the starters.
In some cases, yes. And I think we both talked about at the beginning of the season, the compressed, shortened season, if your starting goalie gets COVID or whatever, or has to have open heart surgery or,
Yeah,
whatever
or yeah,
scenario,
yeah. That
right?
that was like a dramatic left to right. If you get COVID or how open heart surgery, whatever.
Yeah, and we talked about how normally a backup goalie is like still important, but that this year it was going to be even more so. And I think
Yep.
we've really seen that. Like the Penguins really leaned on to Smith for a while until Jari figured it out. We're seeing Drieger really impress. We're seeing Hogberg really impress.
Jack Campbell is playing great.
Like you see what like and you know what? I'm going to admit that I'm wrong because I called at the beginning of the year. I said that if the Leafs were without Freddie Anderson for an extended period of time, they were going to be fucked. And I will admit that that has not been the case, and that
I
Jack
said I
Campbell
said
has
I
stepped
said
up.
Campbell was gonna play better than Freddie. I'm taking my fucking money and running.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll admit when I was wrong. But I mean, history has really shown that the Leafs were extremely dependent on their goaltending, particularly in
Yeah.
Frederik Andersen. And I'd argue that this is less me admitting I was wrong with the Leafs and more so admitting I was wrong with Campbell. I think the Leafs are still as dependent on goaltending as they've ever been. It's just that Campbell's filled that void like it's nothing.
Yeah, and even Hutchinson has been playing pretty well for what he's been doing.
He gets the start tonight
Yep.
because apparently Campbell's dealing with something now.
Well,
So
so
it'll
so
be very
basically,
interesting.
I think it's just Campbell's sore, and I think he'll be fine. I think he just needs he hasn't played for a month, and he had a lower body injury, and he came in and he had a 30 save shutout against one of the best teams in the league right now. So I think he's just sore, and he's fine. He just needs the night off.
No, I 100% agree with you. I think that's what it is, which speaks to, the importance of having depth at the goaltending position. Even that third guy
I
potentially is
I'm
getting called
concerned.
upon.
I am concerned about Hutchinson because it's not necessarily Hutchinson, but the fact that they're playing Edmonton, and I don't think Connor McDavid's gonna be a -3 again tonight.
So
Um,
what I'm hearing is bet the over. McDavid's putting up 7 points tonight.
you know what? It wouldn't even shock me. But Matthews is back in, so that's a plus.
Yeah, honestly, can we talk about how Matthews had a goal a game pace and apparently he's been playing with a hurt wrist the whole season? Like, how the fuck?
Yeah, he's been playing with a sore wrist the entire season. He sustained it last year, or sustained it in the off season, and it's just been bugging him. And the last game that he kind of got slashed the last game, and it really irritated it. But he'll be fine. Players play with injuries all the time. You know this.
Yeah, but I mean, that's wild, though. Like, oh yeah, the guy who literally has, like, an unstoppable shot, which, like, your wrist is really important in that, and is literally scoring in every
Oh,
single one of our games. Yeah, so
yeah.
his wrist has been hurting him. Like, it's been bugging him a little bit. He's had issues with it. I mean, he's still able to score literally every single game despite that, so, like, don't worry too much about it. But, like, yeah, his wrist is hurting. Like,
It's
what?
hurting so much from carrying the team and scoring all the time. So
Yeah,
these
that
are
reminds me of
issues.
like when defensemen in the playoffs would be like, "Oh yeah, like he was playing with like a broken leg for like 3 games." I'm like, "What?"
Like Carl was it Carlson played for no Sagan no Jamie Benn was playing with
Jamie Benn was
screwed
playing
up.
with like half of his body injured,
Yeah,
and it's like, how the hell is that even possible?
yeah, these
Like,
guys are tough shit, eh?
oh yeah, oh yeah.
It just kind of it's a good way to wrap up and saying hockey players are arguably the toughest players in the world, and they're also probably the most stubborn.
Yeah, I mean, once again, you have to respect any player's ability to play through injury. I mean, obviously, we've seen it in other sports. Like the Kobe hitting free throws on a torn Achilles, and then a couple like years later, Klay Thompson did it.
Yep, yep.
We've seen like the Jordan flu game, so it's definitely happens in other sports. Football players play through injuries all the time, but we've
Like
definitely.
look at Mahomes played through turf toe.
Yeah, and then but obviously I think hockey is definitely like a sport where that's really at the key, like at the core of like players, and being tough and being there for your teammates is obviously looked upon as like a number one trait, and it's definitely not flopping around on the floor 7 times, as much as I'm a huge soccer fan too, so like don't take that as an insult towards soccer, huge fan, but you know definitely not the same levels of toughness, I would say, in terms of playing through injuries.
I agree.
Yeah, but I think it's a great place to wrap up. I mean, unless we want to go in depth on Einerson winning the Scotties Tournament of Hearts, got to shout out curling.
Oh, good God, I can't. So much curling this past week. I don't want to talk about anymore.
Hey, I'll admit I watched like the second half of the final game of the gold game.
That's probably a second half more than I have. So
I mean, you gotta support Rachel Homan, Team Ontario, even though she's from
Yeah,
Ottawa, but like Team
yeah,
Ontario.
yeah, totally. Woo,
But
curling.
and like also, I'm gonna just say this right now, like, Team Quebec, Saint George. Oh, like probably the hottest curling player you've ever seen in your life.
And that's where we end this podcast.
Which is like obviously I watched it for like she wasn't in the finals, so I genuinely watched Homan because I was cheering for her to win. But like it was a
Is she
nice.
not pregnant too?
Was she? Because if first of all, that's the other thing. Like any female athlete who plays like while pregnant or just before, or just after, like Serena Williams, like
Yep.
that's just whole nother level of like what, how the hell is that even possible? So yeah,
Yeah.
even something like
Holy
curling,
shit.
which is like
She's eight. She's 8 months pregnant.
who?
Rachel Homan.
Wait, actually,
Yep. She's 8 months
what the?
pregnant.
She just won the silver medal in the
Yep.
Canadian Women's Curling Championship
That's
while
tough
eight
shit. That
months
is
pregnant.
something to brag about. Holy fuck.
Okay, well, I think that's the note that we leave it on because, like, shout out as much as it sucks for Homan because that's 3 straight years winning a silver medal. Um,
But holy fucking shit.
yeah.
She had a baby inside, bro. That's crazy.
Hey, that's cheating. That's a team of 5, not a team of 4. Come on, man. But yeah, I think that'll do it for this episode of the Benchwarmers Sports Talk podcast. Gotta like and follow for all the inside curling scoop. We got the men's championship start up on Friday as well. So, obviously gonna go super in depth on coverage there. I doubt we'll have any pregnant people participating in that tournament, but
Yeah, well, I hold on. Can I quickly? I want to quickly say something right now before
go
we
for it,
hang
go
up.
for it.
So I follow this guy on Instagram, Puck Empire. He said if the playoffs began today, you know what? This is what we'll do to quickly wrap up because I don't give a shit how long this is. Um, Tell me who you'd have in each of these matchups. Okay, I'm gonna go one by one.
Okay, rapid fire style. Here we go.
Tampa Bay versus Carolina.
Tampa,
Florida versus Chicago.
Florida,
Washington versus Philly.
Philly,
Boston versus the Islanders. Whoa,
Islanders.
stumped. Oh, Islanders.
Yeah.
Okay.
Me
Vegas versus Colorado.
realizing that if the playoffs started today, Pittsburgh would miss the playoffs. Fuck.
Pain. Vegas, Colorado.
Oh, come back to that. Come back to that.
Minnesota, St. Louis.
Minnesota.
Wow.
And this is coming from the number one hater of the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, he hates them. Holy shit. Edmonton, Winnipeg.
Edmonton,
Montreal, Toronto.
Toronto,
Okay, Vegas, Colorado.
Colorado.
Okay,
Because
quickly.
I don't think Fleury is going to single-handedly, like, I think Fleury can steal some games. I don't think he's going to be able to play at that, like, elite, ridiculous level the entire time. Plus, knowing Vegas, they'll be morons and they'll start Robin Lehner for half the games for whatever reason, even though Fleury literally has, like, a 970 save percentage.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. All right, yeah, so that's if the playoffs started today.
But obviously they don't, because when the playoffs start, the Pittsburgh Penguins will be ready to win the Stanley Cup.
You're hilarious.
We still have to play 16 games against Buffalo and New Jersey. We are going at least 12-4 in those 16 games. So when I look at the standings, as long as we're within 1 or 2 points of those other teams, we'll make up that ground. I'm not worried.
Okay.
I mean, and
All
realistically, if we don't win 12 games out of 16 against the Devils and the Sabres, we don't deserve to be in the playoffs.
No,
So,
you pain.
yep.
Just pain.
Yeah,
Yep.
pretty much. So thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.